All right, so moving on to the next segment, we're going to switch gears from the NBA back to the NFL side. And in this segment, I will be sharing what team that I believe had the best performance during NFL wildcard weekend. There was a lot of great performances. When you talk about Brock Purdy's historic performance as a rookie against the Seattle Seahawks, and the first game that we saw, the guy that I really want to say, Dak Prescott, who had the best game of his life last night in Tampa Bay. Monday night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we had 4 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown, adding up to 5 total touchdowns. But those are my 2 honorable mentions. But the team that deserves the most recognition for the best performance of Wild Card Weekend is the Jacksonville Jaguars. They deserve a lot of credit for their historic comeback win that they displayed in Wild Card Weekend against the Los Angeles Chargers. At this point in the game, at one point in the game, early in the game, they found themselves down 27-0 with 28 seconds left in the second half. Trevor Lawrence looked absolutely terrible in the first half. I was thinking to myself, why are they calling Trevor Lawrence a generational talent? Why are they saying this is the best generational talent since we've seen at the quarterback position Andrew Luck? I had a lot of questions watching Trevor Lawrence in his first playoff game and his first playoff half. He had 4 interceptions in the first half and had a negative QBR rating, and they still somehow, someway managed to win this football game in an impressive comeback fashion. One of the greatest comebacks in NFL playoff history and in NFL history. This is the game that the Chargers should never let slip through their fingers, let slip through their hands. That comes on coaching, which I'm going to get to in a few moments. But the Jacksonville Jaguars deserve a lot of credit. They never found a way to put their heads down and give up. They kept fighting all the way to the final whistle, and it paid off for them. The Jacksonville Jaguars defense definitely looked alive, looked alert, and played the part in their comeback win in the second half against the Los Angeles Chargers. In the second half of the game, in that game against the Chargers, the Jacksonville Jaguars defense held the Chargers offense to these following drives in the second half: a punt, a field goal, a missed field goal, and a punt. So the Jacksonville Jaguars, hats off to their defense for a stellar second half performance, nearly a shutout in the second half of that football game. And it came down to coaching of why the Jacksonville Jaguars won that game. When you talk about Doug Peterson, who is an offensive-minded head coach, who is a Super Bowl champion, won a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles with a backup in the name of Nick Foles. He just showed why coaching is important from start to finish. Doug Peterson just outcoached Brandon Stanley, who is a defensive coach, who is a young coach whose defense forced 5 turnovers throughout the whole entire game and still managed to blow this game. This is what happens when you have coaching in the playoffs. When you have Doug Peterson, again, who is a Super Bowl champion, won a Super Bowl with a backup in Nick Foles, and beat Tom Brady and the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl. Then you're talking about Brandon Stanley, who is a young NFL coach who is still trying to get their feet wet and prove that he is a guy to lead the Chargers into success. It came down to coaching in this game, and you can't tell me otherwise because the score wouldn't have been like that. A defensive-minded head coach would have shut out an offensive-minded head coach from the time they were up 27-0 all the way down to the end of the game. That didn't happen. We've seen that Doug Peterson was the better coach this night, is the overall better coach this night, and that's why his guys were willing to keep fighting all the way until the end. And then you look at Trevor Lawrence, who deserves his flowers as well. Like I said in the beginning of the game, I was thinking to myself that Trevor Lawrence, he should not be a generational talent. He should not be named in the likes of a generational talent. Should not be mentioned in the same breath of being as special as a special prospect as Andrew Luck once was. But he turned his worst performance into his best performance, and he saved his greatest moment so far in his NFL career for the second half of that game. He had 4 interceptions and finished the game with 4 passing touchdowns. That is a true way to win the game. And not only that, they had a game-winning drive to set up the game-winning field goal. The Jacksonville Jaguars eventually won that game 31-30. So Trevor Lawrence deserves a lot. Deserves his flowers for that special moment. But thinking about it, back on it, it was truly special to watch that comeback. I think that was one of the greatest highlights of Wild Card Weekend, if not the greatest Wild Card moment during the weekend. But think about my list that I made last week. I stand by it. Brock Purdy still deserves to be on my list. My guys during the last week's episode, if you guys haven't watched or listened to it, laughed at me. They clowned me for putting Brock Purdy on my list and not Trevor Lawrence. But Trevor Lawrence not being on my list was a mistake. Now that I think back on it, I should have, instead of had Kirk Cousins at 10, I should have had Trevor Lawrence at least in my top 10. But it looked like I was right for the first half of the game, not having Trevor Lawrence on my list. But he deserved to be on my list. But Brock Purdy damn sure deserves to be on my list as well. But going back to the game, the Jacksonville Jaguars will be a dominant threat in the AFC, I believe, for a long period of time. They're in a bad AFC South division that is going to be rebuilding for a long time. When you talk about the Houston Texans, they're going to be rebuilding for the next 2 to 3 years. You talk about the Indianapolis Colts, who have a lot of question marks surrounding their franchise. I think it's going to take another year or so for them to get back on track. And then the Tennessee Titans as well. They have a lot of question marks around their franchise as well currently. They have a lot of holes to fix. So I feel like the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to take this season, no matter what happens next, as a learning curve. They're going to get better during the NFL offseason. They're going to have Calvin Ridley as their future number one wide receiver heading into next season. I think they'll draft well like they did over the last few years. Get a few more pieces during free agency. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be right back hosting a playoff game next year in the AFC. Maybe being a higher seed than the 4th seed, but I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are heading into a bright, successful future with the likes of Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence leading the way. But that is what I believe was the biggest moment of Wild Card Weekend, the Jacksonville Jaguars' historic comeback over the Los Angeles Chargers.